The Heaven Sword and Dragon Saber. Author, Jin Yong. Chapter 2, Part A. Guoxiong and Yitsu walked towards the Shaolin Monastery. Before long they reached the gates of Shaolin and didn't see anyone. Yitsu said, "I'm not going in either, I'll just ask that monk to come out and deliver the message." He raised his voice and said, "Yitsu of Mount Kunlun pays a visit to the Shaolin Monastery, I have something to say." After he said that, they could hear 10 large bells ringing. The door opened and 2 rows of grey-robed monks came out. In the left row there were 54 monks and on the right side there were also 54 monks. There were 108 monks, these were all disciples of the Luohan Hall, filling up the positions of the 108 arhats. After them, 18 monks came out wearing yellow kasayas. These monks looked a bit older than the disciples of the Luohan Hall, they were the senior pupils of the Demo Hall. After a while 7 old monks came out wearing robes with big squares. These were the 7 elders of the meditation hall. After them, Abbot Tianming came out, on his left Reverend Wu Xiong head of the Demo Hall and on the right Reverend Wu Se of the Luohan Hall. Pan Tian Gang, Fang Tian Lao and Wei Tian Wang followed after the 3 elders. In the end there were 70, 80 common disciples of the Shaolin Monastery. That day Yitsu sneaked into Shaolin and left a note in the Luohan Hall. This incident startled Abbot Tianming, Wu Se and Wu Xiong. Days later Pan, Fang and Wei said they would come to Shaolin and duel, making all the monks very restless and vigilant. The western Shaolin was located far away from here and for many years the monks there didn't make any contact with the Shaolin monks here. But all the monks knew that the patriarch of the western Shaolin Master Gu Wei was a powerful martial arts expert. So his disciples should be extraordinary people too. After hearing that Pan, Fang, and Wei didn't dare to look down upon the 3 saints of Kunlun, and as the saying goes, he who has come is surely strong or he'd never come along. The entire monastery was very vigilant and the abbot has ordered every disciple within a radius of 250 kilometers to return to the monastery and await orders. In the beginning, everyone thought that the 3 saints of Kunlun were 3 people, but after hearing from Pan Tian Gang, Fang Tian Lao, and Wei Tian Wang they knew it was only one man. But concerning age and appearances, even Pan and the others weren't too sure. They only knew that he was proud of his skills in the zither, chess, and swordsmanship. Playing the zither and chess could slacken and leisure the heart and concentration that does no good to their Buddhist meditation. But martial arts experts who specialize in swordsmanship were very willing to duel with this arrogant man who called himself a saint of swordsmanship. Pan Tian Gang and his 2 martial arts brothers felt very confident of themselves and thought this entire incident was their doing and hoped to travel thousands of miles to finish it here. They wanted to defeat Yitsu before he could reach the monastery. After that, they would have a duel with the monks of the monastery and the western Shaolin will be greater than the northern Shaolin monastery. However, after the battle at the Stone Pavilion, Yitsu only used half of his abilities and he could easily overcome Pan, Fang, and Wei. After Abbot Tianming heard of this, he knew that Shaolin was facing an imminent danger. After careful analysis he realized that he, Wu Se, and Wu Xiong were about the same level as Pan, Fang, and Wei. So he asked the 7 elders of the meditation hall to help out if necessary. However, no one knew how high the martial arts of the 7 elders were, and if they are strong enough to defeat Yitsu if it really was necessary. These were all speculations of Abbot Tianming, Reverends Wu Se and Wu Xiong. When Abbot Tianming saw Yitsu and Guoxiong he put his palms together and said, "This must be the saints of chess, swordsmanship and zither, benefactor he. Forgive us for a late welcome." Yitsu returned respects and said, "My name is indeed Yitsu. The nickname of 3 saints is not worth mentioning. I apologize for causing trouble at your monastery and I dare not deserve having all reverends coming to welcome me." Tianming thought, this arrogant scholar doesn't talk very arrogant. He seems to be around 30 years old, how could he easily defeat Pan and his martial arts brothers? Tianming said, "Your very kind benefactor he, please enter our monastery for tea." However this benefactress, he looked a bit awkward. When Yitsu heard that Abbot Tianming wasn't going to allow Guoxiong to enter, his arrogance was aroused and laughed. "Old abbot, I came here to deliver a message on behalf of someone. After doing that I'll leave." But the rule set by your monastery prohibiting women from entering is ludicrous. Frankly, I have problems with that rule. According to Buddhism, every life is equally precious, not making unnecessary distinctions between men and women. Abbot Tianming is an enlightened priest, and is very broad-minded. Tianming smiled and said, "Thank you for pointing that out. We are a bit petty when it comes to that. Well, Miss Guo, please enter for tea too." Guo Xiong smiled at He Tzu Dao and said, "You're very eloquent." With just a few words this old monk already gave in. Abbot Tianming moved aside and made a gesture to welcome guests when suddenly an old and skinny monk to the left of Tianming stepped forward and said, "Just because of benefactor he's one sentence, Shaolin should abolish an ancient custom, which isn't a bad thing, but we would like to see if the person who said those words have any real, impressive abilities. Or does he just clings on to a false reputation? I would like to ask benefactor he to reveal 1-2 special abilities so all the monks can be convinced of your specialties, so we all know that we just abolished a 1,000-year-old rule for a worthy purpose." The old monk who said this was Reverend Wuxia, head of the Demo Hall. His voice was clear and loud, showing that his internal strength was full and solid. When Pan Tianzhen, Fang Tianlao and Wei Tianwang heard this, their facial expressions changed. The words of Wuxian clearly indicate he has no high opinion of these three Western Shaolin disciples. He Tzu Dao defeating them didn't necessarily mean He Tzu Dao had any great abilities. Guo Xiong saw Reverend Wu Sei looking awkward and thought this old monk is a good man and a friend of Yang Guo. If He Tzu Dao really fought against the monks, and either party would lose, she would still feel bad about it. So she said to He Tzu Dao, "Brother He, I don't really have to enter the monastery. After you've delivered the message, we'll go." Guo Xiong pointed at Wu Sei and said, "This Reverend Wu Sei is a good friend of mine. I hope you can be friends too." He Tzu Dao said, "Oh, I see." And turned to Abbot Tianming and said, "Old Abbot, there is a Master Zhu Yuan here in the monastery. Who is it? I have been entrusted a message that I have to deliver to him." Abbot Tianming softly said, "Master Zhu Yuan?" Zhu Yuan's position is very low in the monastery. For many years he was just staying in the library and no one really paid any attention to him. Also, never did anyone call him Master Zhu Yuan, so that's why Abbot Tianming didn't know who He Tzu Dao meant. After a while, Tianming said, "Oh, the monk who lost the Nijia scriptures. Benefactor He, does this have to do with the loss of the Nijia scriptures?" He Tzu Dao shook his head and said, "I really don't know." Tianming told a pupil, "Tell Zhu Yuan to come out and meet our guests." The disciple quickly left. Reverend Wu Xiong said, "Benefactor He, is the saints of the zither, chess and swordsmanship. Ordinary people wouldn't dare to be called saint. Benefactor He must have extraordinary abilities in these three arts. Many days ago you left a note in the monastery telling us that you were eager to display your martial arts. Today you have come and we are very eager to see your martial arts." He Tzu Dao shook his head and said, "Miss Guo already said that both parties should not create any grudges." Wu Xiong was really annoyed and thought, "You left a note challenging us, now you're saying you don't want to fight. In these 1,000 years, who dared to look down upon Shaolin like that? Furthermore, Pan Tiangang, Fang Tianlao and Wei Tianwang were defeated at your hands. If word would get out that the head disciples of the Shaolin school were defeated by you, your name the Saint of Swordsmanship will be even more famous in Wulin. Ordinary pupils are no match for him, I must challenge him personally." Wu Xiong walked forward and said, "Exchanging views on martial arts doesn't necessarily mean creating grudges. Benefactor He, there is no reason to be humble." Wu Xiong turned to a disciple of the Demo Hall and said, "Get a sword. We will see the swordsmanship of the famous Saint of Swordsmanship. And we will see if the word, saint, is the right word to name it." The weapons of the monastery were already prepared, but were not brought out. That was to avoid people from saying Shaolin monks were petty. The disciple went back in and brought 7-8 swords and went to He Tzu Dao and said, "Benefactor He, will you be using your own weapon or will you be using one of our swords?" He Tzu Dao didn't answer and picked up a sharp rock from the ground and started carving lines in the tiles. He drew a chessboard with that sharp rock. Every line was precise, accurate, and deeply carved into the stone tiles. Hitsu Dao just picked up a rock and drew this use and possession of internal energy was rare in the realm. Hitsu Dao laughed and said, dueling with swords might create unnecessary animosities between us. There is no way in competing music. If all you are interested, we could play chess. This display of internal energy and drawing a chessboard with a small rock was amazing. Tianming, Wu Sei, Wu Xiong and the 7 elders of the meditation hall looked at each other and were stunned. Abbot Tianming knew that this man's internal strength was very powerful and no one in the monastery was his match. The abbot was about to admit defeat when they heard a metallic sound walking towards them. It was Zhu Yuan carrying 2 large metal buckets. Behind him was a young tall man. Zhu Yuan put down the buckets and paid his respects to Tianming and said, I await your orders, abbot. Tianming said, this benefactor he has something to tell you. Zhu Yuan turned around and didn't know who Hitsu Dao was. Zhu Yuan said, I am Zhu Yuan. Benefactor he, can I help you? After Hitsu Dao finished drawing the chessboard, his interest for chess was awoken and asked, the message can wait now. Who is interested in a game of chess? Hitsu Dao didn't want to show off his martial arts, but he was always very captivated by the arts of zither, chess and swordsmanship. If his interest was awoken he can forget everything around him. Hitsu Dao just wanted a monk to play chess with now and forgot entirely about fighting. Abbot Tianming said, benefactor he's ability to draw a chessboard with a mere rock is amazing. Such magnificent ability is something I have never seen before. All the monks here are no match for you. When Zhu Yuan heard these words, he looked at the lines on the ground and realized that this Hitsu Dao came here to challenge the Shaolin monastery. Zhu Yuan picked up the iron buckets and took a deep breath and focused all his internal strength to his feet and started walking towards the lines. The chains bound to Zhu Yuan's feet dragged over the lines and erasing it. When the monks saw that, everyone called, good. Tianming, Wu Sei and Wu Xiong were surprised and happy to see that this old and pedant monk had such powerful internal energy. They lived in the monastery all these years and never realized it before. Tianming knows that no matter how powerful the internal energy of one person is, he can never leave such deep prints in the ground. The reason why Zhu Yuan could do this was that his iron buckets were filled with water, so in total, there was 200 kilograms. Before Zhu Yuan could erase all the lines, Hitsu Dao spoke to him, very powerful internal energy, I don't have such powerful internal strength. Zhu Yuan felt his energy growing in his public region, but his legs were getting tired. Zhu Yuan stopped when he heard Hitsu Dao talking to him and turned to him and said with a smile, is there a difference in white and black pieces? Hitsu Dao said, right. This game of chess cannot be played anymore, I lose. I will try your swordsmanship. Hitsu Dao drew his sword and aimed for his own chest and the hilt was facing the opponent. This was a very strange technique and looked like he was trying to kill himself. In all the sword stances in the world there was never such a strange technique. Zhu Yuan said, I only know to meditate and recite scriptures. My responsibility is to tidy the library. I've never learned martial arts. Hitsu Dao didn't believe him and scoffed. Hitsu Dao advanced forward, the tip of the sword was now aiming for Zhu Yuan's chest. This technique was very fast and was practically unequaled by all sword techniques in the realm. This stance wasn't meant to aim for yourself, but the position Hitsu Dao took was to generate his internal energy to the sword and lash out. However, Zhu Yuan's internal energy was so powerful it was able to come and go as Zhu Yuan pleases. Zhu Yuan used one of the buckets to block this technique and the tip of the sword hit the iron bucket. The sword bent a bit and Hitsu Dao retrieved this technique and attacked again. Zhu Yuan used the other bucket to block that stance. Hitsu Dao thought, no matter how high your martial arts is, these buckets are not easy to be handled. How can you block my stances? If you used your hands instead I would have slightly feared you. Hitsu Dao used his index finger to point at the tip of the sword, producing a buzzing sound. It was similar to a cry of a dragon. Hitsu Dao called out, watch out, old monk. With incredible speed Hitsu Dao launched 16 stances towards Zhu Yuan. However, Zhu Yuan blocked all of them. These 16 techniques were called the swift lightning swordsmanship. Everyone could see that Zhu Yuan was in a frantic state. Anyone knew now that Zhu Yuan didn't know any martial arts at all. These excellent sword techniques of Hitsu Dao were all blocked in a very silly way. Wu Sei and Wu Xiong were very worried and called out, Please spare him, benefactor he. Even Wuxian called out, don't harm him. He Tsu Dao put everything he knew in this battle but still couldn't overcome this monk. He didn't believe this monk didn't know any martial arts. The reason why Zhu Yuan could avoid being hit was that he had very powerful internal energy. He Tsu Dao realized his swift techniques were in vain and yelled out. A light flash was aiming for Zhu Yuan's abdomen. Zhu Yuan called out and used the two buckets to clip down the sword. He Tsu Dao wanted to pull the sword back but couldn't move an inch. Quickly, He Tsu Dao changed technique and released the sword and placed all his energy to his palms and attacked with his palms. He aimed for Zhu Yuan's head. At this point, Zhu Yuan couldn't block that move anymore. The situation was very dangerous. Zhang Junbao was very worried for his teacher, so Zhang leapt out and used the technique that Yang Guo taught him 3 years ago, namely extend in all directions. Zhang hit He Tsu Dao on his left shoulder. At this time, the internal energy of Zhu Yuan was focused on the two buckets. The energy forced the water out in two spouts of water. When the energy of He Tsu Dao met with the spouts of water, the water was dispersed but also the energy of He Tsu Dao was gone. Both He Tsu Dao and Zhu Yuan were wet. He Tsu Dao was engaged in the fight with Zhu Yuan and didn't pay any attention to the young Zhang Junbao. Little did He Tsu Dao realize that Zhang's palm technique and internal energy were very good and strong. He Tsu Dao was pushed away and could only stand still after 3 paces backwards. Zhu Yuan said, Amitabha, Amitabha. Please let me go, benefactor he. Those few attacks were really frightening. Zhu Yuan used his sleeve to wipe away the water on his face and quickly stepped aside. He Tsu Dao angrily said, the Shaolin Monastery has indeed many extraordinary people. Even a little boy has such good martial arts. Youngster, let us fight. If you can withstand 10 of my stances I will never step foot again in China. Wuxia and Wuxiang knew that Zhang Junbao was just a boy who cleaned the library and helped out Zhu Yuan in his duties. Zhang never learned any martial arts, he just accidentally hit He Tsu Dao just then. If they really fought, Zhang Junbao wouldn't last one stance. Wuxiang spoke, benefactor he, you're wrong. You are called the 3 Saints of Kunlun, your martial arts is unequaled through the realm. How can you fight with a mere young cleaner? If you don't mind, let me accept that challenge. He Tsu Dao shook his head and said, everyone saw that he just hit me, I cannot let that go unpunished. Watch out, lad. This palm technique was very fast and he stood very close to Zhang Junbao. Wuxia, Wuxiang and others wanted to help but were too late to do anything now. Everyone was worried for Zhang Junbao. Zhang just stood there and his toes were turning to the left and his body turned fluently to the right, taking on the position of an archer. This time, his right hand and left hand were guarding his waist. His right fist attacked. This was a beginning of the Shaolin fist style called, the flower fist piercing through right. This stance was absolutely excellent. This was a movement that should be made by a martial arts expert, not a young boy. When He Tsu Dao suffered a blow to his shoulder he knew that this young boy's internal strength was superior to Pan Tiangang and others. But he was confident he could defeat Zhang Junbao within 10 stances. When he saw that attack made by Zhang he was quite impressed and said, excellent move. Wuxiang thought of something and smiled to Wuxia, congratulations, elder brother for having such a good disciple. Wuxia shook his head and said, I didn't. At this point, Zhang Junbao used another 3 stances to counter-attack. All the movements were grand and energy generated was full and fluid, not inferior to any Shaolin martial artist. Tianming, Wuxia, Wuxiang and the 7 elders of the meditation hall saw that Zhang Junbao's techniques were that spectacular. They were all stunned. Wuxiang said, the grandness of his stances is nothing compared to his energy. At this point, He Tsu Dao already used 6 stances and thought, if I cannot defeat this young lad, everyone in Wulin will laugh at me for leaving a note to challenge Shaolin. Suddenly He Tsu Dao changed his movement and used a stance called, the floating snow flocks of Mount Tian. His palms were incredibly fast, and it seemed like Zhang Junbao was surrounded by palms. Zhang Junbao was never really instructed on martial arts by anyone, with the exception of Yang Guo 3 years ago. This is the first time he saw such strange and fast palm techniques and didn't know how to counter it. In a fit of anxiety, he used a Shaolin stance called, 2 circling hands. Zhang Junbao raised his two hands above his face and stood there. This stance was very grand and majestic. No matter how, or where He Tzu Dao attacked, his attacks will always be met by these two hands. The monks of the Demo and Luohan Hall were all calling out, "Good!" They were all impressed by Zhang Junbao's technique and praised him for using a simple Shaolin stance to foil a heavy and complicated palm technique. He Tzu Dao changed stance again and aimed a fist towards Zhang Junbao. Zhang returned the attack with a stance called, the flower leaning towards the 7 stars. Zhang's palm met with his fist, there was a banging sound. He Tzu Dao's body shook and Zhang Junbao backed 5 paces. He Tzu Dao's face changed and said, "One more stance, try your best to deal with it." Everyone remained silent. They knew that this final attack of He Tzu Dao was very powerful. They knew that he threw in everything to win at this point. Again Zhang Junbao used, the flower leaning towards the 7 stars. This time there was no sound when fist and palm met. Both were generating internal energy. When it comes to all-round martial arts, He Tzu Dao would win with ease over Zhang Junbao. But when it comes to internal energy, Zhang learned some parts of the Juyang Codex, so his internal strength kept increasing and increasing. He Tzu Dao knew he couldn't defeat this young boy and leapt away and let Zhang Junbao's energy dash forward and used his right hand to push gently on Zhang's back, causing him to fall over. He Tzu Dao waved his hand and smiled wryly. He Tzu Dao, you are too arrogant." He Tzu Dao turned to Abbot Tianming and said, "The martial arts of the Shaolin Monastery are renowned for 1,000 years. It is indeed amazing. Today I have seen enough, knowing that the good name of Shaolin is well deserved." He turned around and leapt forward a few meters. Suddenly he turned around and said to Zhu Yuan, "Reverend Zhu Yuan, someone told me to deliver this message. The manuscript is in the oil/Jingzai Yu Zhang." After saying that, he even leapt further away and his movements were incredibly fast, so fast that it was rare in the realm. Zhang Junbao slowly struggled up, his face covered with sand. Although he was beaten by He Tzu Dao, he already admitted his defeat to Shaolin. Suddenly one of the old monks of the meditation hall spoke sharply and coldly, "Who taught this disciple martial arts?" Everyone felt uncomfortable after hearing this old monk talk. Abbot Tianming, Wuxia and Wuxiang were all thinking about this too. They all looked at Zhu Yuan and Zhang Junbao. Zhu Yuan and Zhang just stood there not knowing what was going on now. Tianming spoke, "Zhu Yuan's internal strength is powerful, but he never learned any other forms of martial arts. Who taught this boy martial arts?" The disciples of the Demo and Luohan Hall were all thinking. Luckily today there was a young cleaner who come forward and warded off Shaolin's disaster. The old abbot will surely reward him and the master who taught him martial arts. The old monk of the meditation hall stood still and his eyebrows were raised. He looked like he was ready to kill someone. The old monk sharply asked Zhang Junbao again, "I'm going to ask you again. Who taught you this Luohan fist style?" Zhang Junbao took out the little iron arhats Guoxiang gave to him and said, "I just learned a few stances from these little statues. No one taught me any martial arts." The old monk stepped forward and slowly said in a threatening way, "Tell me one more time. Your Luohan fist was not imparted by any master of the monastery. You learned it by yourself." Zhang Junbao was a bit startled, but he also believed he didn't do anything wrong. Even though this old monk looked very stern, he wasn't afraid and said clearly, "I'm just responsible for keeping the library clean and tidy. I'm here to look after and help Master Zhu Yuan. No other reverend in the monastery has taught me martial arts. I learned this Luohan fist by myself. I think I might have made a few mistakes in the stances. I hope old master can give me some pointers." The old monk's eyes looked like spitting fire and fiercely stared at Zhang Junbao for a very long time and not moving. Zhu Yuan knew that this old monk was a senior of the monastery. He was one of the martial arts uncles of Abbot Tianming. Tianming, himself, stood a generation higher than Zhu Yuan, Wu Sei and Wu Xiang. Zhu Yuan didn't understand why this old monk was so angry, and he saw that the old monk's eyes were filled with hate. Suddenly he realized something. He once read in a codex something that happened more than 70 years ago in the Shaolin Monastery. More than 70 years ago, the abbot of the Shaolin Monastery was Reverend Ku Cheng. This abbot Ku Cheng stood 2 generations above Abbot Tianming. One year in autumn, during a yearly contest held in the Demo Hall, something disastrous happened. It was a tradition of Shaolin to examine and evaluate the disciples' martial arts every year. This was done in the Demo Hall. The abbot and the two elders of the Demo and Luohan Hall would be the one to evaluate the disciples to see whether they had improved this year. That year, the judge was the elder of the Demo Hall, Reverend Kuji, and all the disciples were displaying their martial arts. Suddenly a Totuo entered and yelled out, "Ku Wei is full of nonsense and doesn't know the real essence of martial arts. He shouldn't even be the head of the Demo Hall. This old monk is a complete disgrace." All the monks were surprised and saw that this Totuo was a mere monk in charge of cooking meals for the Shaolin disciples. All the monks scolded him and started telling him to be quiet. Totuo is a Buddhist monk with hair. Totuo was a monk with a lowly position in the monastery. He and other similar monks were in charge of cleaning, preparing meals for the real Shaolin disciples. These monks do not participate in studying martial arts or in meditation. They cannot be considered to be Shaolin disciples. They also called Huogong Totuo, meaning the monk working in the kitchen. This Huogong Totuo yelled, "The master is full of crap, the pupils are even more incompetent." So he went to center of the hall, and challenged all the Shaolin disciples one after the other. They were all defeated easily within 3-4 stances. It was the rule in the Demo Hall to be lenient in the battles. But this Huogong Totuo was very vicious. He defeated the 9 head disciples of the Demo Hall. All 9 of those pupils were heavily injured by him. The elder Kuji was angry and shocked and saw that this Huogong Totuo used Shaolin martial arts, so it wasn't an expert from a different school who came here creating havoc. Kuji asked him who taught him martial arts. That Huogong Totuo said, "No one taught me, I learned it myself." It seems that the monk who was in charge of the kitchen was a very bad-tempered monk. This monk would often beat up other monks, and this monk learned some martial arts, so he often hit them very hard. Huogong Totuo was beaten up so severely in 3 years that he coughed up blood 3 times. In a fury, he started to secretly study martial arts. All the Shaolin monks knew martial arts, and it was easy for him to secretly observe and learn it. He made extraordinary, painstaking efforts, and plus, he was very intelligent, so in these 20 years he learned superior martial arts. However, he kept a low profile and performed his duties, and even if the head of the kitchen would beat him up, he didn't feel a thing anymore with his high internal energy. This Huogong Totuo also had a sinister and violent personality. He waited till he felt confident no one in the monastery was his match and wanted to show off his abilities in the annual contest. All these years of being beaten up made him hate all the monks in the monastery. So when he fought those monks, he didn't show any mercy. When Reverend Kuji knew what he did, he scoffed and said, "Taking such trouble is worthy of my respect." Kuji stood up and challenged Huogong Totuo to a fight. Reverend Kuji was a top martial arts expert from Shaolin, but he was already very old and Huogong Totuo was just middle-aged. Secondly, Kuji was being lenient with his techniques and Huogong Totuo only used ferocious stances. So they were able to fight each other till 500 stances. At this point, Master Kuji was gaining the upper hand and both used the same stance, namely the Grand Intertwining Silk. 4 hands were entangled with each other. However, Kuji's hands were placed on the death acupoints of Huogong Totuo's chest. If Kuji was to release his energy, Huogong Totuo was surely to die. But Reverend Kuji admired and respected his ability to learn such powerful martial arts with no one teaching him, so he wanted to spare him. So Kuji pushed his 2 hands forward and called out, "Turn back now." Unfortunately, Huogong Totuo misinterpreted and thought Kuji used a technique called 8 Strikes of the Divine Palm. One of the special skills of Shaolin that Huogong Totuo saw the disciples of the Demo Hall using was this stance before using both hands to strike out and breaking a wooden beam. The energy released is formidable. Although the martial arts of Huogong Totuo was high, he never received any pointers from any experts, and the martial arts of Shaolin are deep and profound. He only secretly saw and observed some skills, but he could never learn everything completely. The stance Kuji used was the resolve stance. But Huogong Totuo thought it was the 6th technique of the 8 strikes of the divine palm, namely the heart-splitting palm. He thought, "You want to take me life, don't you? Well, it's not going to be that easy." So flew towards Kuji and his 2 fists were aiming for Kuji's body. The energy of the fists was incredibly powerful and violent. Kuji was shocked and quickly raised his palms to block, but it was too late. Everyone heard a cracking sound. The arm of Kuji was broken, as well as 4 of his ribs. All the disciples rushed forward to help and they saw Kuji looking deadly pale and couldn't talk anymore. His internal organs were all severely injured. When they looked up, Wudang Totuo was gone in the confusion. That same night, Reverend Kuji passed away. The entire monastery was mourning. Little did they expect that Wudang Totuo sneaked back in Shaolin and killed the head of the kitchen and 5 other monks who used to bully him. The entire Shaolin monastery was shocked and sent out various martial arts experts to track him down, but in vain. After this incident, the senior elders of the monastery had an intense argument. And in a fury, the elder of the Luohan Hall Master Ku Wei left the northern Shaolin monastery and went to the western regions to found a western Shaolin monastery. Pan Tiangang, Fang Tianlao and Wei Tianwang are his descendants. Also because of this, the Shaolin monastery was in a down period. The abbot set a new rule: no one was allowed to learn Shaolin martial arts without a master teaching him. If not, in the worst case, this person will be put to death, and in lighter cases, the muscles and veins of his arms and legs will be snapped and this person will become disabled for the rest of his life. But in all these years no one ever learned anything without permission, so this rule was forgotten by most monks. This old monk of the meditation hall was the youngest disciple of Master Kuji, and the image of the death of his teacher is still vividly in his memory. So this incident with Zhang Junbao stirred up his anger and hate. Zhu Yuan practically read all the manuscripts in the library and remembered these events. So Zhu Yuan broke into cold sweat now and pleaded to the Tianming, "Old abbot, this cannot be blamed on Junbao." At this time, the elder of the Demo Hall Reverend Wuxia called, "All the disciples of the Demo Hall go forward and seize that boy." The 18 Demo disciples surrounded Zhang Junbao, Zhu Yuan, and even Guoxiang. That old monk of the meditation hall sternly yelled, "Why don't the disciples of the Luohan Hall go forward and seize that boy?" All the 108 disciples said, "Yes," and surrounded Zhang Junbao, Zhu Yuan and Guoxiang. There were 3 circles of disciples around them. Zhang Junbao was in a frantic state. He believed that by defeating Hitsu Dao he broke the rules of the monastery. Zhu Yuan loved Zhang Junbao like a son, and he also knew that if Zhang was captured, he will certainly be punished severely. At this time, he heard Wuxiang call out, "What are you waiting for? Seize him." The 18 disciples of the Demo Hall stepped forward to seize Zhang Junbao. Zhu Yuan didn't think anymore and turned a circle, and the 2 iron buckets were rotating, causing the monks to back off. Zhu Yuan threw the remaining water out of the buckets and placed Guoxiang and Zhang Junbao in the buckets. He whirled the buckets round and round like a pair of comet hammers. All the disciples of the Demo Hall quickly moved away. Zhu Yuan swiftly leapt away and carried the 2 buckets with Guoxiang and Zhang Junbao away. The monks gave chase, and after a while they lost track of them. The rules are very strict of Shaolin, and the head of the Demo Hall gave an order to seize Zhang Junbao, so even if the monks couldn't catch up they must still pursue them. After a while, the monks with a level in the art of levitation were still chasing while the others were falling behind. In the end, only 5 monks were still running about, and they knew even if they caught up with them, they wouldn't be a match for Zhu Yuan and Zhang Junbao. So they didn't have an option but to return to Shaolin. Zhu Yuan ran kilometers away from the monastery and he stopped when they were in the deep end of the forest. Although Zhu Yuan's internal energy was powerful, this running away took a heavy toll on him. He was too weak now to even put down the buckets. Guoxiang and Zhang Junbao jumped out and lifted the buckets from his shoulders. Zhang Junbao said, "Master, rest for a while, I will look for some food." But he couldn't find anything else but some wild strawberries. The 3 of them ate some and rested. Guoxiang said to Zhu Yuan, "Reverend Zhu Yuan, all the monks of the Shaolin monastery are very weird. With the exception of you and Reverend Wu, say." Zhu Yuan only murmured something. Guoxiang continued, "You and your pupil defeated the 3 saints of Kunlun Hitsu Dao. They should be thanking you, and now they want to capture Brother Zhang. That's ridiculous." Zhu Yuan sighed, "This cannot be entirely blamed on the old abbot and Buddhist brother Wuxiang. Shaolin has a rule." After saying that, Zhu Yuan started coughing and couldn't catch his breath. Guoxiang softly patted his back and said, "You're tired, you should rest now. We shall talk about this tomorrow." Zhu Yuan sighed, "Yes, I'm very tired." Zhang Junbao made a small fire to dry his and Guoxiang's clothes, and the 3 of them slept under a tree. In the middle of the night, Guoxiang heard Zhu Yuan murmuring. It sounded like he was reciting sutras. So she woke up and heard, "The strength of the opponent just reaches my skin and hair, my essence penetrate the opponent's bones. Raise your two hands and let your energy flow fluently. The left is heavy, yet empty, the right flows ever away. But the right is heavy yet the left is empty." Guoxiong thought, this isn't a Buddhist sutra, and that final part was related to martial arts theory.